Bonnie covered some of my history, obviously. I usually like to sort of briefly go over who I am and why you're listening to me, other than, they put me in front of you. Hopefully I can motivate you to listen to what I have to say. So, this is basically my life story in a PowerPoint. And the laser doesn't even work on that thing. Damn it. Okay. So I'll do it without a laser. Maybe that laser works. Okay. So I dropped out of high school in 1988 because I was a terrible student and had some authority issues. And so the SEALs was a great place to go if you have authority issues. Because, the military is not really about authority at all, right? I heard about this SEAL training thing, BUDS. It was the toughest training in the world, and I thought I was the toughest guy in the world, so I wanted to be a SEAL, and I went through SEAL training, went to SEAL Team 5, spent 7 years there, and then, as the story goes, I met a girl, and, being a SEAL is kind of a young single man's game. I was becoming neither, so I figured, okay, I'll go do something else. I started volunteering at a sports medicine facility to get enough volunteer hours to apply for physical therapy school, which is what I thought I would do, and eventually was talked into becoming a doctor by the doctors that I worked with. So I went to UCSD, have a BS in neuropsych, and then I went to the military's medical school, did an internship in OB-GYN against my will. That's a story I would tell over cocktails if you guys want to buy. And then the Navy has a residency for people who want to work with divers and or submarines. And they call that a diving medical officer or an undersea medical officer. That's what that's about. So it's a 1-year residency. There's actually not a whole lot to learn, but you go through dive school and you learn some dive physiology and you learn some radiation stuff around the submarines and so on and so forth. But you have to do that if you want to be a doctor for somebody like the SEALs, and of course that's where I wanted to go back to. So I eventually went back there, and as Bonnie said, I got there at a very fortuitous time. It wasn't my initiative, but if any of you are familiar with the government or big bureaucracies, initiatives take 10 years to actually manifest. And so I got there on the 10th year, and they said, why don't you be in charge of building this clinic? And obviously I had a great sports medicine background. I'd worked in sports medicine for 6 years in college and was preparing myself to be an orthopedic surgeon, and so that was a great fit. And unfortunately, I learned absolutely nothing about sleep along the way. And I'll skip that part right now to sort of give you the preamble as to what led to me being interested in sleep. Once I became a SEAL doctor, the Navy SEALs are just like professional athletes or pilots or law enforcement or something. Worst thing you can do in the world is take their job away. All right. So when they go see their doctor, and the doctor says, "How are you doing?" What do you think the answer is? Great. Fantastic. Is that a bullet wound? No, that's a scratch. Why is your foot duct taped? Whatever. So they'll just flat out lie, say everything's fine. But because I had been a SEAL recently enough, there were still SEALs there that I went through training with and that I was a SEAL with. And the more important thing is I had a good reputation as a SEAL, and so they would come in my office and they'd close the door and they'd say, "Let me tell you what's really going on." And they'd list out this whole litany of symptoms. Mood issues, emotionality, poor communication, poor memory, poor cognition, lack of motivation, shifts in body composition, working out really hard, couldn't really stay lean, lots of pain, lots of joint pain, lots of problems sleeping, all sorts of things, right? Now, doctors are often called healthcare providers, and I know there's some doctors in the room. I hope not to offend any of you, but I don't believe that we are actually healthcare providers. We're disease care providers. So we're very educated on how to recognize, identify, and treat disease. I learned nothing really about health in medical school. They didn't teach me how to program somebody's exercise routine or, modify somebody's diet, work on somebody's nutrition, work on somebody's sleep, work on somebody's stress. I didn't learn any of that stuff. So these guys didn't have disease, but they weren't performing at the level that they expected to and what you would expect them to be able to perform at. And in the medical world, if you don't have a disease, you can't treat it, right? So I can't give somebody a pill if I don't diagnose them with something, right? And these guys don't want to be diagnosed with anything, and most of the pills I would give them would be disqualifying. So as I said, I'm a high school dropout, so I'm not the smartest guy in the world. And probably about the 100th guy who told me the exact same story mentioned offhandedly that he takes Ambien every night. And in all honesty, he took 2 to 3 Ambien every night and a couple of cocktails to chase that down. And then he would wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. And so he said, well, I'll get up really early. I'll get up now. I'll go to the gym. I'll work out super hard. I'll go to work. And when I come home from work, I'll be really tired and I'll be able to sleep. And I'd say, great. How long have you been trying that? I'd say, like, 5 years. And I'd be, keep going. Tonight's probably the night. So that, when I looked at their because I didn't know what was going on, honestly didn't have a clue. I thought, well, they've been in combat 8 years, so maybe it's adrenal fatigue, maybe it's, this combat fatigue that they talked about, in other words. But it wasn't until like that 100th guy that I thought, well, let's think about sleep a little bit. And so that sort of led me into this spiral of what I know now and what I practice now. And I'll talk to you in a second about how I practice medicine these days. But the fortunate thing for me is I was in this tremendous spot because the SEALs had already developed, this semi-celebrity status that they have now. So I could read a guy's book and he'd be the best, top researcher in the world in a certain area, and I'd call him up and say, I read your book, I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEALs, I'd really like to come train with you, or I'd like to consult with you, or I'd like to read anything else you have. And so I got to learn really quickly and ramp up on my knowledge on what's really kind of called integrative or functional medicine these days, which is just sort of looking at the lifestyle and etiology around lifestyle first and then looking for disease. So the way I think about medicine now and when I work with private clients, or even if I do corporate wellness or programs or whatever, is I focus on these 4 areas. So nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress. And obviously not to stress them out, but how do you control their stress? And that varies widely, and all of these things vary widely. But you find out what works for the individual. And the important thing to recognize is that we break the body down into systems as a way to learn, right? We study the nervous system, we study the cardiopulmonary system, we study the musculoskeletal system, but our body doesn't know it has systems, right? Like that's our design. Our body functions as one. Everything impacts everything. What you eat affects your exercise and your sleep and your stress affects what you want to eat, and your stress affects how well you sleep, and your stress affects your exercise, and that's why it's in a circle. Okay, so here are my lecture goals. Hopefully these are attainable. And I'll forewarn you, I thought I had an hour, and I only have 45 minutes. I figured I'm going to include questions, so we might skip through a few things. But the first thing I'd like to do is just encourage you all to reconsider the importance of sleep. We're in a society that essentially romanticizes the hard worker that gets up super early, works into the late hours of the night, and we call those people, high achievers and type A and go-getters and whatever. I would ask you to question that during this lecture. You can completely blow me off 45 minutes from now, but during this lecture, just keep an open mind and say, maybe this guy's right, okay? And then secondly, I want to foster interest for you all to go on and learn more about sleep. I cannot possibly teach you everything that you as an individual need to know about your sleep or anybody else's sleep. in this short of a lecture, but I can get you along that path, and if you're interested, you'll be able to figure it out. It's not rocket surgery. Okay, so true to the academic background, you always start with the definition. Anyone? Now, hold on. I understand that there are at least 2 physicians in here that specialize in sleep, so you're not allowed to answer. But anybody else? What is sleep? All right, hold on, back up. I probably stuttered. Has anybody here slept before? Okay, you slept. You raised your hand. You just volunteered to answer the question. What is sleep? You do it, right? We all do it every day. Anybody have an idea? Throw something out there. Yes, sir.
It's rest for the mind and the body at night.
Okay.
Just falling asleep and sleeping all night.
Okay.
Booting up your brain.
I'm sorry? Booting up your brain. This kind of boot? Yes, sir.
Sit on a couch.
Actually, that's the best definition. You're not the sleep physician, are you? Okay. All right. So, the grandfather of sleep medicine. Sleep medicine is not a very old field. About, 60 years old, 65 years old at this point. Grandfather of sleep medicine is a guy named William Dement. And he has a definition which I've improved upon. So, there's a barrier that exists between you and your environment. So, I'm obviously very interesting, so none of you are going to doze off. But if you were to doze off during a lecture, you'd still be asleep, wouldn't you? But somebody coughing, somebody saying your name, like anything could wake you up. There's a very low barrier. But I know a lot of women here with their husbands, and they will tell me that if their husband were in bed at home asleep and a car crashed into the front of their house, he wouldn't wake up, right? Very high barrier. But that's basically what it is, right? Our brain is interacting with our environment. We're sensing, we're smelling things, we're seeing things, we're hearing things, we're feeling things, right? We're tasting things, like we're interacting with our environment. Once we put that barrier up, that's part of being asleep. Now, there's another part of it, though, that you have to consider. So, what's your name, sir?
Ron.
Ryan?
Ron.
Ron. So, if I ask Ron to come up here and volunteer, you can let me know if you want to do this, we can. Stand here, and then I hit him in the head with a bat. And then he falls to the floor. He falls to the floor. Who would say, look, Ron fell asleep? Right? Okay, there's a barrier between him and his environment. This is the second part. You have to be able to be awakened, right? You have to be able to wake you up. Okay, so largely because of sleep aids, I've added this to the definition, and that there has to be predictable neuronal patterns. And we'll get into that a little bit more. I'm not going to do like a polysomnograph where it looks like a crazy, was it Jason Pollock? Or, no, who's the Pollock? Jackson Pollock, yeah. But we should be able to put all these electrodes all over your head, and we should be able to see sort of predictable neuronal patterns of groups of neurons that are firing together that let us know that you're going through certain stages of sleep, and then that's normal, what we call sleep architecture, and I'll cover that in a second. And if that doesn't exist, then I say it's not sleep, right? So I've seen lots of people to do sleep studies that take sleep aids, and they come back from their sleep study and they have 99.6% stage 2 sleep. And they're exhausted all the time. I'm like, okay, well, you're not actually sleeping, right? They're unconscious, but they're not necessarily sleeping. So we've gotten past that. Let's talk about what gets in the way. So we obviously have kind of taken ourselves off the planet, right? Like we evolved on this planet with the planet, like every other animal on this planet, for a very long time. And in the last couple of 100 years, we've kind of been like, we got it from here. Right? We're going to do whatever we want. Make it light when it's dark, make it cold when it's warm, we'll make it warm when it's cold. we'll eat stuff that's not even food. Like, we do whatever we want to do now, right? I'm not going to walk anymore. I'm going to drive everywhere. We've just kind of dismissed evolution. And that, I will submit, is one of the big problems in people being able to sleep well. So ancestrally, this is complicated, so take notes. We went to bed after the sun went down, about 3 hours after the sun went down, because it takes several hours for your brain's chemistry to change to get you ready to fall asleep. And then when the sun came up, we woke up. And then we did the same thing, mix and rinse, lather, and repeat. You guys have that? All right, so interesting thing, just 100 years ago, 105 years ago, journaling in America shows an average of about 10 hours per night in bed. Anybody here spend 10 hours a night in bed? Congratulations. Give the rest of the wine to this lady. So most of us don't do that because why? We'd be lazy, slovenly pigs, and we wouldn't be worth being around anymore. And honestly, we don't need that much, but we'll get to that. Okay, so this is, I've labeled this circadian release of cortisol. Again, I'll ask that anybody here who knows a lot about sleep physiology allow me to be oversimplistic here. This is not exactly the way it goes, but this is, we have these organs in our body called our adrenal glands. You guys have heard of this? They secrete adrenaline, no surprise there. They also secrete cortisol and several other hormones, and what the adrenals do is they keep us alert in proportion to our environment, okay? So right now, your adrenal glands are racing because you're fascinated by my talk. But if you're at home reading a book, your adrenal glands would be, kind of here. And if somebody starts shooting through that window, your adrenal function goes up here, right? And I'll submit that, if this is fight or flight, and this is deep sleep, which are the opposites in adrenal function, and we should live around here most of the day, ancestrally, the way we evolved, the way we live our lives with all of the stressors of modern life, we probably don't live here anymore. We live up closer to the fight or flight, which means we need to be able to suppress more stress when we're going to sleep. But we're more stressed already when we're going to sleep, and our brain doesn't really know how to make more of the hormones that will decrease our stress, so we have to do that outside of the sleep environment. And that's why everything matters. So the basic idea of this is that when the sun goes down, our sort of adrenal function is decreasing, and then somewhere in here we fall asleep, and then this is really deep sleep. And then it starts coming back up naturally after our brain is restored, and we'll talk about some other things that happen. And after lots of good physiological things have happened, it starts coming back up, and it reaches a certain peak that if you didn't have an alarm clock, you would have enough adrenal function to wake you up. This coincidentally happens around sunrise if you go to bed and, if you use the sun as your cue. And then it, peaks a little bit later in the day and it comes back down again, and it happens over and over again. But again, my point being, what if your cortisol curve was up here the whole time? You could see where it would be harder to get adequate sleep and quality sleep. And quality of sleep matters just as much as quantity. So this is a very quick diagram, and I'll get into the specifics of this in a second. I just wanted to give people an idea and make myself look smart by putting molecules up there in brains. So you have these neurons, these ganglion in the back of your eyes that sense blue light. Okay, my guess is because the sky's blue, but I don't know. They sense blue light. When the blue light decreases to a certain point, then it sends this little pathway down, and you might have heard of this called the master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and then it goes down the circuitous path, and eventually it stimulates the pineal gland to produce melatonin. Anybody here ever heard of melatonin? Everybody's heard of melatonin, right? And one of the things melatonin does is it changes a lot of our brain chemistry, but it also suppresses adrenal function and decreases our stress hormones and gets us ready for sleep. So a little more detailed. We'll go through it. Blue light decreases, stimulates pineal gland, releases melatonin. Melatonin decreases adrenal function. Body temperature decreases. That's a normal cue for going to bed. That's why things like cold baths and cold showers help you go to bed. That's why things, part of the sleep ritualization of children is to give them a bath or something that, that actually lowers their body temperature as well, even if it's a warm bath, because it all evaporates off of them. Your heart rate decreases, your blood pressure decreases. Largely, again, these are all because adrenal hormones are going down. There's a neuropeptide called GABA, which increases in our brain. And this double, as you get, I'm going to get injured using two hands. This part of our brain here, the neocortex, that's the part that makes us the smartest animal in the world. That's how we really interact with the world. That's how we interact with our environment. And this neuropeptide GABA goes into that region of the brain, and it makes it harder for those neurons to fire. So it makes it harder for us to be stimulated by our environment. So if you've ever laid down in bed and you kind of start getting that little warm, fuzzy, I'm about to go to sleep, but you can still hear stuff going on, but it's not quite the same. That's GABA, right? That's lowering your interaction with the environment. That's creating that barrier we talked about. And then blood sugar also drops, and your immune system increases, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. So this is one of the things that I figured out with the SEALs. Of course, I wanted to get them all off of sleep drugs because I figured that was a bad thing, even though I didn't know exactly why at that time. So I went to literally like college level textbooks on sleep physiology and tried to figure out what's supposed to happen when you sleep, and I came up with this. Get it? No. Okay. What happens on Thanksgiving? We overeat turkey and take a nap. And why do we take a nap? Everybody knows. What's it? Tryptophan, right? Now, truth be told, tryptophan is in all meat, but obviously, the tradition of Thanksgiving is to overeat, right? Overeat with people that annoy us. And we primarily overeat turkey. But if we overate steak, the same thing would happen because there's lots of tryptophan in steak. But this is how it's played out. So we associate turkey with taking a nap. Now, there's some other reasons. I'm not going to get into it. There's some other reasons you get tired. But we know that tryptophan is rich in turkey. We build up tryptophan. Coincidentally, tryptophan converts into something called 5-hydroxytryptophan. 5-hydroxytryptophan, you've probably seen this 5-HTP in health food stores. It calms you down, right? It's in the calming stress section and so forth, primarily because it leads to serotonin. Anybody know what we call people with low serotonin? Depressed, right? Moody, pricks, I don't know. And then serotonin becomes melatonin. And again, melatonin lowers adrenal function. However, interesting thing that I learned after the fact, after I'd kind of started trying to give the SEALs all these supplements because I was taking away their sleep drugs, right? You can't take away something that somebody's chemically dependent upon and just say, suck it up, princess. Like, you have to give them something in replace. So I'm giving them tryptophan, I'm giving them 5-hydroxytryptophan, I'm giving them melatonin. And then I find out, well, this reaction between 2 and 3 requires vitamin D3 and magnesium. And you guys have probably heard that vitamin D3 helps with sleep. This is one of the ways. There's other ways, but this is one of the ways that it happens. So that's a cofactor. So then I put guys on vitamin D3. If you can imagine a SEAL, when do they work? Nighttime. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to sneak around in the desert in the day. So they walk around at night. And then they sleep during the day, and even if they are out in the day, they're covered from head to toe in camouflage, helmets, body armor, all kinds of stuff. So they're not getting vitamin D3. That's the only place you can get it. You can get it from supplements, but you can't get it from food. You get vitamin D2 from food, but your skin has to convert it to vitamin D3. So this pathway is very important, and it's going to be an ongoing theme as we talk through the rest of this lecture. Now, if all of this stuff falls into place and you use the sun to go to, use your sun as your guide, or if you do some of the little tricks that I'll talk about because you probably don't use the sun, that's not a realistic goal for most people, so there are some tricks to do that. If all of that happens, and then and your nutrition is good and all of those components of that pathway are there and you make plenty of melatonin and your stress hormones go down and you're not on sleep aid, you didn't drink yourself to sleep, you didn't drug yourself to sleep, you get this what we call sleep architecture. And this is sort of the end result of a lot of information from a polysomnograph. And these are the normal stages of sleep. So when you first get into bed, you're awake, and then you kind of drift down into this near sleep, stage 1, and then stage 2, there's lots of things happening there too. We used to think not much happened in stage 2, but it's becoming more and more obvious that there are some important things happening in stage 2, primarily sort of like the triggering of the initiation of memories that you're then sort of dealing with, and the initiation of things you've learned and so forth. And then you get down into what these 2 stages here. Some people have dropped off stage 4, not important. We just call this deep sleep or slow wave sleep. And the way it should happen is you fall asleep and then you spend a good hour and a half to 2 hours in deep sleep. And this deep sleep is where you secrete, and not just this one, but if you add up all of these deep sleeps, and if you look, this is REM sleep, that's REM sleep, that's REM sleep, that's REM sleep. If you look, the beginning of the night is primarily deep sleep. The end of the night and the early mornings is primarily REM sleep, and we'll talk about the differences. And this deep sleep, that's when you're secreting growth hormone. That's when you're secreting testosterone. It's like 98, 99% of all the testosterone you'll produce is going to happen during deep sleep. If you drink alcohol or if you use certain over-the-counter sleep aids, you don't get deep sleep. That's what was happening with the SEALs. They were coming in with testosterone of an 80-year-old man, and they were 25 years old. They were drinking themselves to sleep and drugging themselves to sleep. This is also when your immune system is at its highest, okay? Let me back up. Testosterone, growth hormone, everybody's heard of that, right? Important, anabolic, right? Allows us to recover and repair. We know that testosterone is the dominant sex hormone for men, right? What's the dominant sex hormone for women? Testosterone, okay? Women have 10 times more testosterone than they do estrogen. But the way we do the labs, it looks like you have more estrogen than testosterone because we use different units. However, men have 10 times more testosterone than women, which is the difference, but men still have estrogen, women still have testosterone. And it's just as important for your anabolic behavior. Now, anybody here an athlete or former athlete or like to work out, stay fit, right? Okay. When you're exercising, you're actually getting stronger while you exercise. I'm asking you. You raised your hand. While you're exercising, are you getting stronger while you're exercising? No. You're actually getting stronger here, okay? Because what happens is when you exercise, or even when you don't exercise, if you're just active and you're running up and down stairs and you're doing busy stuff and you're washing your own car, mowing your own lawn, or even if you're just using your brain a lot, and you have an active, healthy lifestyle, this is the area when you're repairing all of the damage. You actually, when you lift weights or when you run or do something that's more taxing than your body's capable of doing, you damage those cells. The only way to be able to do more than that, or to even do that again, is for those cells to repair. And if they repair very well, because you have good growth hormone and good testosterone and good insulin sensitivity and good thyroid and lots of other things in a good immune system, those cells repair stronger. They're bigger, better, faster, smarter, better looking and everything. And then you're faster or you're stronger, whatever your sport is, you're more enduring. And that's when you improve. This kind of the same thing, and this is again an oversimplification. Everything again happens at all stages, but that's predominantly what's happening here. And in the REM stages up here, the same kind of thing is going on in your brain, okay? So everything that you've learned during the day, that's actually in your short-term or your working memory. In order for that to become a long-term memory, a durable memory, something that you can use, manipulate, compare to other data that you know, you have to convert it over into long-term memory. It's like the difference between a footpath and a freeway, okay? You have this really big, robust pathway where all this information can flow. You can access it really quickly. You can compare it to other stuff you know. When it's in your working memory, you can't do that. This is where muscle memory comes from, right? If you learn how to ride a bike, you can always ride a bike, right? It's muscle memory. You don't have to think about it anymore because there's a durable track in there. So this holds true for anything. This holds true for learning information from a book. It holds true for learning how to play an instrument. Anything you want to learn how to do, you have to convert that over into long-term memory. And I won't have time to get into this, but you can actually stage naps in between learning sessions to where you can learn twice as fast because you can consolidate into long-term memory by taking just a short nap, and then you can train again, and then you can sleep that night, and you'll actually learn any skill or knowledge twice as fast. Unless you're in medical school, because then you have to read 28 hours a day. All right, so we talked about, I talked about kind of what's happening physiologically. Let's put some tangible things to that. So what happens? Sleep improves declarative procedural memory, what I just talked about. Decreases inflammation. People think of inflammation as like swollen joints or something. It's not. I mean, like that's part of it, but it's not just swollen joints. So you can have generalized inflammation around your gut, inflammation everywhere. And you want to decrease that because chronic inflammation interferes with anabolic behavior, which is rebuilding. Chronic inflammation is catabolic, which is breaking down. Sleep improves healing. I talked about that. Restores hormones. Improves body composition. Not sure if it's in here, so I'll say it now. If you deprive yourself of 1 hour of sleep every night, and we'll talk about how much you actually need, 1 hour of sleep every night for a year, on average, you'll gain 14.3 pounds of fat. Sleep improves reaction time, cognitive speed, work, and we're going to talk about that in a minute when I show you some comparison charts. The basic point of this, mood, communication, affection. This is actually an interesting story. I probably shouldn't tell it. It's going to make me go too long, but I'm going to do it anyways because I have authority issues. So a couple study, they took these couples, right, and they did this multiple times, and they'd say, we're going to pay for your day tomorrow. You're going to go do whatever you want with your spouse. You're going to hang out, go to the movies, go to the beach, whatever you want to do. You're going to take care of your kids. We're going to call your boss, get your day off work, whatever. But we're going to deprive one of you of 2 hours of sleep. So instead of getting 8 hours, you get 6 hours. And you spend the whole day together. And then here's where it gets cool. At the end of the day, you get to go into 2 separate rooms. And you get to evaluate your spouse, right? And they say, how nice was your spouse today? How well did he or she communicate? How affectionate were they? How bonded did you feel? All of this stuff. Doesn't matter which one you sleep deprived, they both say the other one wasn't quite there. It wasn't quite normal. Doesn't matter. And we're going to get to that in a second. So, the obvious question, how much do we need to sleep? Hopefully in a minute I'm going to piss you guys off with these numbers, but this is adolescent, right? This is high school. Pay strict attention to that one. But this is adults, okay? Most sleep organizations will say 7.5 hours plus or minus half an hour, okay? But up to 9 hours. It's not constant, right? Do you need the same amount of food every day? No. If you work out really hard, you're super active one day, might need a little more sleep. But so 7 to 9 hours is the number we use there. So let's look at something else. How much sleep are teens getting? First, remember that, 8.5 to 9.25. That's how much they need. How much are they getting? 22% get 4 to 5 hours. 77% get 6 to 7 hours. 1% still get less than they need, but get 8 hours. Anybody angry? Infuriates me. And there's an organization, you guys can all join and get behind. Start School Later is the name of it. We've tested the theory across private schools, which have control, less truancy, less disciplinary problems, higher GPAs, better sports records, across the board, more happiness, all that stuff. GPA, based on sleep, 7 or more, significantly different than this group, which we said was 77%. Talk about sports. This was actually college and high school athletes. That's a pretty damn impressive slope, if you ask me. This is over 21 months. So in 21 months, if you sleep 6 hours a night on average, you have like a 75% chance of being injured. And this is a significant injury. It's not talking about like stubbing your toe. Goes down, and then 9 hours, because they're adolescents, right? They need 9 hours of sleep. 9 hours goes down to what, 17%. So you ask, what about 5? That's might be better, right? My postulate is that these guys didn't have the energy to actually play their sport. I don't know. All right. So what happens when we don't sleep? Besides destroying our kids' brains and their ability to learn and making them smaller and grumpier and making us grumpier and worse parents, what happens to us as adults? Okay. He's going to sue me one day. I've been using this picture for like 5 years, and someone's going to tell him. So we talked about growth hormone, testosterone decrease, chronic inflammation, its immune system, which leads to lethargy, right? When you don't have anabolic stuff and you're chronically inflamed, you feel low energy, you don't feel like doing much, you don't move around much, you get metabolic changes that are unfavorable, you start craving different food, your insulin sensitivity changes, you can't actually use the food you're eating nearly as well. Body composition shifts, like, there's a big belly down there, all that stuff. Interesting little joke of Mother Nature. Both men and women convert testosterone into estrogen. However, in men, the only place we do it is in our subcutaneous fat, which is like the fat you see when you take your shirt off, right? Like the fat around our organs doesn't do it, brown fat doesn't do it. But, the fat, the beer belly, like that kind of fat, that converts testosterone into estrogen. Now, your brain actually figures out how much testosterone you have by how much estrogen is going into your brain. So if your subcutaneous fat turns your testosterone into estrogen, your estrogen goes high, your brain goes, wow, look at all this estrogen. We obviously don't need to make so much more testosterone. So you start decreasing how much testosterone you make, you get fatter. All right? And then your muscles shrink because you don't have enough testosterone to be anabolic. You move less, you get even fatter, and eventually you get movies. It's not a cool look. Nobody can pull it off. I think he's one of the coolest guys ever. If he can't pull that off, like nobody can. Okay, let's look at a few acute things. I'll kind of blaze through these because I'm down to like 7 minutes or something. I'll show you a chart for this, but basically you're kind of impaired if you're driving a car after you've been awake for 17 or 18 hours, which every one of us in this room have done and probably do on a regular basis. 6 hours of sleep, we'll just call 2 hours less than you need. Decreases sex drive 30 to 40%. Freudian slip. Sleep deprivation is only self-observed for 2 to 3 days. This is interesting. I'll show you a graph about it in a minute. Goes like this. Guy goes into a bar, has a beer, knows that he's had a beer. He's going to wait at least 30 minutes before he drives home. Big guy. He knows he's not drunk. His friends say, come on, you chump, have another beer. He has another beer. It's like, all right, I better wait a long time before I drive home. Friends talk to him again. Another 3, 4. Fourth beer, what does he say? I can drive. I'm fine. Cool. Sleep-deprived people, and the way we do this is you sleep adapt them first, put them in a room, let them sleep as much as they want, as many days as it takes to get them down to about 8 hours a night. And then we take a little sleep away from them, test them the next morning on any kind of skill, you name it, strength, speed, coordination, memory, I don't care. Test them on anything, and then say, how do you think you did? And they'll say, I didn't do very good because I was tired. Because they've adapted to sleeping 8 hours a night now, so they're really tired. And day 2, they say the same thing. Day 3, they say the same thing, maybe. But by day 4, just like the drunk guy, I feel fine. I did as well as I've ever done. Literally documentation where researchers showed them, no, look, you're still getting worse. And they argue with them, no, you're screwing up the data. I know I did. I did as well as I've ever done. Just like a drunk guy, right? We'll talk more about that. Short sleep increases daytime hunger by 25%. We talked about the 14% there. Decreases insulin sensitivity by 30%. So if you're pre-diabetic, peri-diabetic, and you short sleep, you wake up diabetic. If you're kind of close to being pre-diabetic and you short sleep, you wake up pre-diabetic, possibly diabetic. It doesn't last the whole day, but makes your morning revolve around coffee and donuts. So this is basically an inflammation marker, so increases inflammation like we talked about. Executive functioning, I got to talk about this really quickly. Executive functioning is this region, right? So above our eyeballs, behind our forehead. That is where we make executive decisions. That's our simulator. That is, the part of our brain when we're really angry that goes, should I flip off my boss or should I just walk out the door and, take a break? If your simulator isn't working very well, you'll flip off the boss. That doesn't work out well. Now, what do people with ADD have? Impaired prefrontal cortex. If you look at the symptoms of chronic sleep deprivation and you look at the symptoms of ADHD, indistinguishable. So my postulate is if you have a kid who's diagnosed with ADD and they haven't sleep adapted them yet, it's not a valid diagnosis until they sleep adapt them. Because I got diagnosed with ADD at 32 years old, which I thought was the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. I didn't even believe in ADD, actually. And once I started sleeping, but I'd slept 5 hours a night, maximum for about 12 years. Once I started sleeping, magically, I no longer had ADD. All right, so here's the data I was talking about. These are days of the study, and this is kind of like, the pink is where you're impaired. So we're testing people. This line is 4 hours time in bed, 6 hours time in bed, 8 hours time in bed over 14 days. And if you look at their error rates, like these guys just keep climbing, but right here they're saying that they're normal. And look at where they're at. They're like in the truly impaired range. And here and here and here, they're saying they're normal. They're adapted. They're normal. They're normal. And they'll never admit to this, but they just continually get worse and worse and worse. So if you do 12 days in a row, you'll read that over there if it's not too pixelated. You do 12, 13 days in a row, 6 hours of sleep, you perform as though you haven't slept for 40 to 64 hours, okay? This right here is just being awake for 20 to 40 hours, which all of you who've ever stayed awake that long know that that's a pretty stupid state to be in. And our first responders, law enforcement, DOD, DOJ, doctors, nurses, all that stuff do this all the time, okay? Here's a chart that they kind of fudged a little. I like the chart, but, people like their data to look a certain way. So if we need to really compare apples to apples, so 96% basically it's like a 4% deficiency in performance. If you look at this one, 96 is here, so they kind of make it look like it's the same, but it's not exactly the same. The point is, blood alcohol level of being drunk, this is legally drunk, which I think is ridiculous, right? It's illegal, but legally drunk. So this is like actually impaired. This is obviously a basket case, but if you start looking at the performance, decrements over here, being awake for 24 hours, right? 24 hours is looking a whole lot like this, right? Looking a whole lot like being drunk. And they've done this with reaction time and coordination tests and doing the alphabet backwards and field sobriety test and everything that you would do to test a drunk person. Driving test. Other long-term effects, I won't go into these in great detail, but basically every disease you've ever heard of is in this group right here. This was actually a military study, 750%, so 7.5 times more likely to commit suicide if you're chronically sleep deprived. Do you think the military ever sleep deprives people? And then routine illness. So your risk of getting the flu, 3.5 times, 350% higher just by not sleeping enough. Performance, we've talked about basically all of this stuff. What we didn't talk about basically increases your risk of any addiction. And then we did talk about that as well. And then we talked about the communication issues, which obviously leads to more divorce, more spousal abuse, more child abuse, more domestic violence. And then interestingly, down here, tenfold, 10 times, right, 1,000%, 10 times more likely to be depressed if you're chronically sleep deprived. I love this stat. We all worry about our 19 to 24-year-olds getting in a drunk driving accident. 4 times more likely to be killed by being tired than being drunk. 56% of men, 45% of women, so half of the world at any time is driving drowsy, driving sort of incapacitated to some level. Oh man, I'm done. 18% of all fatal car accidents, 50% of all heavy truck accidents, most common dominant factor in all airline crashes. Probably shouldn't cover this a whole lot. Caffeine, I don't have time to get into the physiology of it. Caffeine basically interferes with your ability to go to sleep if you drink it too late in the day. You've probably all heard that, right? The one thing you might not know is that how long it takes you to metabolize your caffeine varies drastically, okay? So there's really no purpose in ever having more than 200 milligrams of caffeine. It actually is counterproductive after that. There's Starbucks coffees that have 600 milligrams of caffeine. My thought is that they're doing that because you'll be so tired after that 600 milligrams that you're going to go get another coffee. I'm a conspiracy theorist. Authority issues, remember. But, you know, if I take in 200 milligrams of caffeine, theoretically, 6 to 9 hours later, I should have 100 milligrams of caffeine in my bloodstream, and then so on and so forth. Some people metabolize it very slowly. They take in 200 milligrams. 40 hours later, they have 150 milligrams in their system still. Okay, so you have to figure out like where your sweet spot is. I'm not testing anybody over this, except for you because you didn't answer my question. The point of this is sleep drugs don't work because sleep drugs work on one thing. So these things in bold, these are regions of the brain. This is the lizard brain, the part under the neocortex, the mammalian brain all mammals have. All of these regions change drastically. Every single one of these things that aren't bold, these are all neurotransmitters, and they're all changing. And they're changing throughout the night, depending on what stage you're in, how long you've been asleep. They change to get you to sleep. They change to keep you asleep. They change to wake you up, okay? And all of these things have to happen in synchronicity. This is like the orchestra, right? This is an orchestra. And a sleeping aid is like going, we're going to put a guitar in the orchestra. That will solve it. Right? Not going to work. All of these things still have to work, right? So most work on just one thing, and I'm going to skip past all of the things that work on because it's not all that important. So how do you actually get to sleep? This is what we call sleep hygiene. I like to summarize this, and I'm sorry I'm going over, but I can't stop myself. You've all heard of sleep hygiene? Most people have heard of sleep hygiene. Anybody really know what it means? Kind of like a little bit nebulous. Basically, it's if you've ever had a kid or if you've ever been a kid and you remember the whole bedtime routine, that's kind of what sleep hygiene is. Like there's a routine, there's a ritualization to get ready for bed. You want to do certain things to get your environment ready for bed. So you can go get your Google on and find 5,000 recommendations for this. But they're designed to do two things, all right? All sleep hygiene does one of two things. It increases melatonin production by decreasing the blue light in your eyes, or it increases GABA, which decreases the activity of your brain and how much you're interacting with the environment. That's it. All sleep hygiene is based on those two things. You could all figure out how to do sleep hygiene on those two facts, but go ahead and do Google. You'll find all sorts of gadgets and tricks. Blacken your room completely. Silence of the lamb dark, creepy dark, can't see your hand kind of dark, that kind of dark. Quit using electronics in bed. In fact, in the bedroom, shouldn't do it at all. make a very hard bedtime. I usually recommend that my clients set an alarm clock for when they're getting up for work or for their day, and they set an alarm clock for when they're going to start getting ready for bed, and those two alarm clocks are taken equally as seriously. Get up at the same time every day if your life supports it. If you're a shift worker, talk to me afterwards. You're screwed. There's not a whole lot I can do, but I can kind of give you some tricks to make you less screwed. Learn 5 ways to decrease stress. Again, you don't need me. Millions of things to do that. Meditation, religion, spirituality, yoga, Tai Chi, whatever. Improve your sensitivity, your insulin sensitivity via diet. Exercise daily. That's, again, insulin sensitivity, but lots of other benefits to it. Decrease the blue light in your eyes 3 hours before bed. I'll show you a way to do that without turning the electricity in your house off. That's my sleep product. That's a shameless plug. I didn't mean that to be in there. If you snore really loudly, get a sleep study. There's a chance you have obstructive sleep apnea, and that's like a sleep disease, which I'm not talking about sleep disease right now. I'm talking about sleep optimization, sleep hygiene. Another thing up here, I take it out because I always get misquoted on it. But when I say blacken your room and get rid of electronics, what you're really doing is you're making your bedroom a cave that you only sleep in. Like your bed is only for sleep and sex, right? That's all you do in your bed. You don't read in your bed. You don't use your iPhone in your bed. You don't watch TV in bed. I take it out because I always get accused of saying you can only have sex in your bed, which I never said. You can have sex anywhere you want to, but your bed is for those two things. All right. So that's my sleep remedy at the bottom. Like that's my supplement that I designed. The SEALs kept harping on me to make it into a product because they were tired of buying all the ingredients separately, and I did. You can buy it online if you want. You don't have to. You can just go buy all these ingredients, and it's exactly what I told you guys. I'm giving this lecture to the powers that be so you guys can have access to it. Here are a few gadgets you can use. These are actually shooting glasses. These are the ones I use because they're super light. If you put those on, gaming glasses do the same thing. Shooting glasses do the same thing. They have an argon coating on them. They refract blue light. So you can put those on. You can't even tell you have them on. After a few minutes, you forget. And then if you have blue light coming in, doesn't matter because it's not actually getting into your eyes. This is a computer program that will actually, you can download it on your computer. You can set your time zone. When the sun goes down, it takes the blue light out of your screen. And when the sun comes up, it puts the blue light back in your screen. iPhones now have a similar feature. This is for blacking out your windows. People like to get fleeced for money if they're going to do anything, so I sell those for $199.95. If you can't black out your room completely, or if you're in a hotel, you're traveling, whatever, this is the next best thing. Get a sleep mask. And then I highly recommend that people do something to track. Like people who like gadgets, buy a gadget. Buy a Jawbone, drive Fitbit, like I don't care. Like they're all pretty much the same. But if you don't like gadgets, you can just journal, like how well did I sleep, how much did I sleep. But if you don't measure it, you'll never get better at it. And then this is just a way to relax. This is a program that you can put headphones on and it'll help you get into deep slow wave sleep pattern or slow wave brain patterns. And then again, these are resources you guys don't want to copy down, but these are all places you can go to look up the information that I'm talking about and get new ideas. And these are books that I recommend. Again, you don't necessarily have to write all this down. I think that's the only important thing. The only thing after that is my contact, but it's pretty easy if you remember my name. And I think you guys have a handout, so docparsley.com is my website. If you guys want to copy any of these books. This book, Chronotherapy, is really good for psychiatric disease and depression and so forth. They're doing some really good work around bright light therapy, when to exercise, when to get light exposure, circadian rhythm alignment that's affecting everything from depressive episodes to schizophrenia, bipolar, all sorts of things. Really, and then this is William Dement, the godfather of medicine. This is a really cool book that will teach you. This little wheel, you can spin it and go, I woke up at this time and I want to improve my creativity, so I nap at this time. And the book will teach you how to do that and how long to nap and when you should nap. And then this is a book basically about nutrition and sleep. So that's it. I went a little long, but you guys can ask me questions as long as you want, but I don't know what the other folks here think. They might kick me off stage. I'm bigger than him, though, so he's not kicking me on stage. Questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned the effect of blue light on the initiation of sleep. Have any studies been done on the relationship of color blindness to falling asleep?
I'm sure there has. However, the ganglion that sense that blue light have nothing to do with vision. And in fact, a lot of blind people still have those ganglions. So there's just like 3 layers of ganglion in your eyes, and only 2 of them have to do with vision, and the one layer is just this blue light sensing. And that's all it does is regulate the master clock in the brain. So I think 80% or so of blind people still have those ganglion, although they can't see at all. So I don't think there would be a correlation with color blindness, but I don't know. I haven't tried to look that up. You in the red, ma'am.
What are your thoughts on daylight savings time and sleep hygiene? And also, what if you live in Alaska or something like that where it's dark all the time or it's light all the time?
Move to Texas. Texas is cool. Daylight saving time is basically 1 hour jet lag. You should be able to overcome that in a couple of days. Not a big deal. I wouldn't put too much in there. If you are in so far north that you're in perpetual sunlight or perpetual darkness, you just have to do all this stuff artificially, right? I mean, we didn't evolve to be up there, right? Nobody wore a loincloth up into Antarctica and survived. So we figured out a way to be there. You just have to game the system, right? You get super blacked out, curtains and bright high lux lighting in your house to simulate sunlight and all that. That's really all you could really do. Yes, sir.
Have you done anything with polyphasic sleep and how people generally sleep 3 hours a night?
Yeah. So polyphasic sleep is, sort of a nebulous term, but the SEALs do polyphasic sleep all the time. All polyphasic sleep really means is that if you cannot get an adequate nocturnal, your main sleep block, if you can't get it adequately, try to catch naps in there as frequently as you can, or whatever intervals sort of your schedule allows. The whole concept of sleeping only 3 hours and never more, and doing 3 hours and then 3 hours later and 3 hours later and getting 9 hours over the coast, that's been disproven. You can survive that way, but you'll never thrive. You'll never be optimal that way. But of course, SEALs and special operators and first responders and stuff do that kind of stuff all the time. Doctors do that stuff all the time. They pull call every third night and stuff. But it's not optimal, and a lot of people have seen the research sort of circulating around about these super sleepers who have some sort of genetic advantage over the rest of us, and they only need to sleep 4 hours a night. I think there's a presidential candidate who claims something like that, and I'm not calling anybody a liar, but here we go. There is no research, to my knowledge, that has shown that anyone can sleep less than the recommended sleep periods and be at their optimal performance. There is research that shows not everybody suffers as much, and some people take longer to break down. That's what the genetic advantage is. That's it. You, sir, in the back.
How much sleep? I'm sorry. Does your body know how much sleep it needs? I was surprised when you mentioned your clients wake up to an alarm clock. It sounds unnatural. So is your body oversleep?
Your body, you can oversleep, but if you're chronically oversleeping to a point where it's deleterious to your health, there's usually an underlying metabolic or physiologic condition that's causing you to be that tired to make you sleep that long. Something like obstructive sleep apnea would be an example of that, right? Because you're not really getting great sleep. So those guys can sleep 12, 14 hours every day and feel like crap when they wake up. But what I usually tell people is just look at it as sort of a lifelong thing, right? So don't count your teenage years, but probably mid-20s or so. How much sleep have you needed over your lifetime? And if that drastically changes, then I would be concerned that there's some underlying thing going on. But if you're really tired, if you've really been, working, like I run 3 businesses and sometimes I'm really tired and I'll sleep 12 hours. It's done. But if I slept 12 hours every night, I'd be a little concerned about it. But there's no problem with letting your body wake up whenever it wakes up. And I didn't get into it, but in the trials where I was telling we sleep adapted people, this is what happened. So almost everybody here is carrying sleep debt. It's just like credit card debt. Every time you don't sleep enough, it goes on your credit card. The faster you pay it off, the better. The longer you keep it, the more costly it is, right? We all carry sleep debt. The bunker trials where they did that, sleep adapt everybody, give them as much sleep as they need, and then deprive them and see how they test. I think that 6 weeks was the first one. They varied. There's been 30 or 40 of these things done at this point. They put them in a cold, dark room with nothing but a cot and a toilet, or a bed and a toilet. 14 hours a day, let them out 10 hours a day, 14 hours a day, let them out 10 hours a day. The average person slept 12 and a half hours for the first 2 to 3 weeks, and then gradually started weaning themselves down to about 8 hours a night. They had no idea what time it was. That was just how long they were sleeping. So the vast majority of us, if we were put in that condition, would probably sleep 12 hours a night.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
When I've read about sleep, they say 10 o'clock is like the
When I've read about sleep, they seem to indicate that 10 o'clock is like this magical time where we need to be asleep. I do not want to go to sleep at 10 o'clock. Is there anything magical about 10 o'clock and so many hours after the sun has gone down and like that?
Well, 10 o'clock is when the Sandman makes his rounds. No. The reason they say 10 o'clock is on average across many latitudes. On average, the sun goes down close to 7 o'clock. 3 hours after the sun goes down is when your brain's ready to go to sleep optimally. But if you're going to take the blue light out of your computer and wear blue blocking glasses, or have blue, light bulbs in your house that don't have blue, and you want to make 11 o'clock your 3 hours after, or 12 o'clock your 3 hours after, as long as you're getting your 8 hours, it's okay. I wouldn't go past 12 though. You start getting into the early mornings, and then you start getting less deep, slow wave sleep, and you'll get more REM, or you'll probably get the same amount of REM, but you'll get less slow wave sleep.
Let's thank our speaker. Thank you very
Oh.
much.